She stood on the bridge and watched the river shine. Morning light schemed the water. At first she thought it was only a reflection. Then a heavy piece of metal rolled onto the shore like a sleeping fish. It was large and dented. Salt and oil stained its edges. Circles were carved across its face. The circles fit together like rings. When the sun hit them, they looked like small laughs. Fishermen walked close and held their breath. A child reached out and the metal vibrated against his fingers. The sound was very small. It felt like a song. Word ran fast. Phones buzzed. A crowd came with boots and questions. A reporter set up a camera and spoke into a microphone with a voice that tried to be calm. They called the Find the Fallen plate. People took pictures. They sent the pictures to friends. The city felt new and noisy. Dr. Noor came from the university with a small team. She had thin hands and a soft voice. Machines and numbers were her work. She put sensors on the plate and watched a screen full of blinking lines. The lines did not match anything in her books. They looked more like drum beats than math. She smiled a small, careful smile. Then she tapped the plate with 2 fingers. The plate answered. A tiny latch opened on the edge and a pin showed bright and clean. When 2 people tapped the plate in time, the pin moved more. The plate listened to rhythm, not a command. Noor wrote the note in her small book, pattern, not code. Far from the shore, in a narrow alley full of old engines, Adil kept a scrap stall. He loved broken things. He loved the stories inside rust. That morning a rusted crate had washed up near his yard. He opened it and found an orb the size of a fist. It fit his palm like a warm stone. When he pressed the orb, it hummed and flashed soft light. He wrapped it in a cloth and put it in his coat. He did not tell anyone. Noor and Adil met because the city is small in the way that matters. She needed a plate to test a sensor. He needed a motor part. They walked to the yard together under low clouds. The yard smelled of salt and old rubber. Men with oily hands moved slowly under tarps. Children peered through slats. The orb in Adil's coat warmed against his thigh. They set the plate on a bench in the light and touched it together. Noor tapped a beat and Adil answered. The plate sang back with a small glow and a soft click. A broken lamp on the bench glowed steady. A small pump in the corner turned once and pushed water into a bucket. The crowd whooped. The yard workers clapped and some cried. Small things kept happening. A seam would hold when a woman hummed while she sewed. A bolt that snapped under a hard swing would heal when a boy tapped time with a spoon. The scrap liked careful hands. It did not like force. When a man hit a plate in anger, the plate shivered and a small fragment cracked. The lesson came quick: rhythm and care, not force, opened these things. The city split on what to do. A dealer in a tidy suit offered coins for the big pieces. He promised factories and quick jobs. A man from the harbor command came with neat papers and a quiet voice. He asked if the plates could protect docks and convoys. He spoke of danger and shells. Fear and hope pulled at the yard like 2 dogs on the same chain. At night the lab feed showed a line of green text across a black monitor. It read in thin letters, "We notice." The message appeared and vanished in a blink. No one could say where it came from. People who watched the recording felt the hair on their arms stand up. The phrase felt like a question and a warning at once. Noor did more tests. She tapped slow, then fast. She set a small speaker to play a human rhythm and watched the plate answer. The patterns fit like keys. Her notes filled with words that felt larger than her. Pattern binds to wool, she wrote. Wool sounded dangerous when she spoke it aloud. What gave the scrap meaning? What was the price of teaching it? Adil kept the orb close. At night when he could not sleep, he took it out and pressed it. The orb would hum back a different song each time. Sometimes the song matched the rhythm of a street drum from a market. Sometimes it matched a child's laugh. Once, while Adil tapped with a spoon like a small drum, the orb blinked a tiny map in green light. It showed a point far off the coast. He thought he imagined it. He was not sure. The yard closed its gates. Men with thin badges put a fence around the largest scrap. They said it was for safety. People pressed faces to the wire and argued in low voices. Adil stood near the gate and felt the orb warm. He looked at the circles carved on the fallen plate and wondered if they were only marks or if they were a language. That night a small drone came like a black beetle and hovered above the fence. It was quiet and thin. It dropped a small paper tied in a ring pattern. The paper hit the mud and unrolled. On it, stamped in the same ring design as the plate, there were 3 simple words: "Teach us one song." Adil picked up the paper with fingers that trembled. The orb in his pocket hummed. The city outside the yard slept badly. Inside, under the yellow lamp, he pressed the orb and felt the small pulse answer like a voice. He thought of children, of hunger, and of men in suits. He thought of Dr. Noor's careful face. Someone, somewhere, had asked for a lesson. The question sat in the room like a drum beat. What would humans teach when another voice asked them to sing? They built a small shed by the river and called it the workshop. The shed was not clean. It smelled of oil, wet wood, and frying bread. People came with boxes of broken things. They brought old radios, snapped wrenches, toys with missing wheels. They set their junk beside the fallen plates and the small glowing orb. Adil kept the orb in a wooden box under his bed. He opened it only when he needed courage. The orb made soft notes when he touched it. Those notes were not words. They were like birds calling. He would tap in time and the orb would answer. The answer felt like company. Dr. Noor put a row of sensors on a plate and invited people to try simple beats. She asked 2 children to tap spoons together. They smiled and kept time. The plate opened a tiny hatch and let out a small puff of blue light. A broken lamp by the bench glowed steady. The crowd cheered like it was a small miracle. They learned rules fast. The scrap liked quiet hands and slow rhythm. It did not like force. When a man struck a plate hard, it shivered and a hairline crack ran across its face. The scrap rewarded care and punished abuse. The workshop wrote the rule on an old board: gentle hands, steady beats. The city gave them a name: the many bond. Dr. Noor said the scrap did not follow one voice. It liked many voices together. So they taught a chorus. 10 people would name a list of names. 10 hands would touch the plate. Only then would the device wake. They put jars in the shed. In the jars they burned a scrap of paper with the names on it. They called those jars anchors. The first uses were small and kind. A village pump that had failed for years started when 10 farmers stood around and spoke. A long street of lamps lit at night with less fuel. Food moved to a neighborhood that had been cut off. People who had little began to hope. Children learned the songs while they played. But every gain had a cost. Dr. Noor watched volunteers who sang the most. She did tests with paper and warm machines. A seamstress who hummed at a plate every day forgot a neighbor's name for an hour. A young mechanic who sung to an engine could not call his sister's middle name until the next morning. The loss was small at first. The workshop called it the echo. They tried to stop the echo. They taught anchors and double lists. They trained people to read names twice and to carve them into wood. They made nights of chanting that stored names in many mouths. The echo grew less when a name lived in many hands. But it did not go away. News of the workshop spread like a warm leak. Some men in suits came with heavy papers and talked of factories and profit. Others came with maps and spoke of defense. A man from the harbor command asked for a shield to stop shells. He spoke with a hard voice. He offered crates of parts and guards as payment. The team argued. Adil and Dr. Noor wanted to help towns with pumps and lamps. Lila, who fixed radios, wanted to refuse big deals. But fear in the coast was strong. People were hungry and angry. They needed protection. The team agreed to try a small shield, but they kept the many bond rule. They layered plates like fish scales and bound them with song. 10 voices named people and promises. 10 hands touched the shield. The shield bent a test shot in the yard and a chunk of the test box stayed whole. The crowd whooped and cried. The command man smiled and his neat hands tapped the money he would send. The first full test had a cost. The blast bent toward the workshop next door and cracked a small wall. A young engineer shouted and then held his hand to his ear. A loud noise had taken his hearing for a moment. The team felt the price in the room like a cold wind. They realized a shield that saved could also break. Meanwhile, others watched from far places. Private fleets and unknown skiffs read the workshop's public feeds. A clever man tried to record the chorus and replay it later to trick a plate. The recording worked on the weakest pieces. A recorded chant could open a tiny hatch. Machines learned to accept a warm voice and a warm anchor. A recording had no warmth. But some machines did not tell the difference. That discovery made fear sharper. If a recorded chorus could fool a plate, someone could fake a many bond and make a machine obey a false will. The team started to test for warmth. They set a sensor on the anchor jars. The jar had to warm with real breath. The spike in heat had to match many hands. The workshop made rules: no single voice, living breath, double anchors. Still, a strange pattern kept returning on the lab screens. At first it was a blink. Then it was a ring. Then it became a message. Late one night, every monitor in the workshop lit up with the same green ring. A thin line of letters formed inside the ring and then vanished like a tide. The letters read a single word: student. The word felt small and large at once. Not a threat. Not a promise. A note. Something had read their work and spoken a title. Dr. Noor felt her hands go cold. Adil held the orb and felt it answer in a low note that sounded like a hush. Outside, lights far on the sea burned steady. They were not ship lights, they knew. They were slow and patient. The workshop's radios caught a faint tone that matched the plate's laughter pattern. The tone looped once and then went quiet. The team watched the sea and the screens and the jars with ash. They had taught a machine to sing, and someone else had heard the song. The green word sat in their minds like a drum beat: student. Cliffhanger: at dawn a small crate washed up beside the workshop. No name. No stamps. Inside the crate lay a thin metal tongue that hummed when touched and a small paper stamped with one ring. The paper read in neat letters: we learn fast. Adil closed his hand around the humming tongue and felt a new question like cold water: who would teach them next? They called the project the Fleet because that name made people feel brave. The yard became full of hammer taps and song. Old hulls lay in mud. Men and women came with nails and plates. Children brought ropes. Everyone learned the many bond. Dr. Noor taught the workers to say names first. Say the person's name, she told them, then promise the work. Each plate on a hull needed many voices. Each anchor jar held burned paper. Names sat in wood and jars like small ghosts. The craft grew like a stitched whale. It looked rough and proud. Adil walked the decks with a tired smile. He kept the little orb in his box, but he watched people more than the box. He watched hands bind plates with song. He watched a seamstress hum and the metal warm in her palm. The Sparrow was the first ship to be whole. It was small and patched. It had a hull of old iron and alien plates sewn like scales. On Sparrow's first day, the crew stood in a ring and spoke names. They read from carved lists. A dozen voices made the many bond. Then they struck the engine key together. The motor breathed and the Sparrow schemed a finger of air above the water. It did not fly high. It did not need to. It moved like a bird on the tide. The first voyage felt like a festival. Markets waved flags. Mothers clapped. The Sparrow sailed to a town that had been cut off. Its plates made a soft shield and the small convoy reached the pier. People cheered and cried. A child hid a shard in his pocket and hummed at night. But building for many hands made more work. Each ship needed names that people would keep. Each crew had to practice songs so their voices matched like tools. The workshop taught sailors the rituals. They carved names into beams under the deck. They tied jars of ash into ropes. They read names at dawn and at dusk. Memory became a job. Trouble showed in small ways first. After long nights of singing, a sailor forgot a neighbor's face for an hour. He would reach to say a name and the mouth closed. He would feel a blank and then find the name when another sailor sang it. The healers called these slips the echo. They were small, but they came more with longer songs. News of the fleet spread beyond the coast. Men with closed papers watched and counted. Private fleets and old navies sent spies. Someone on a far channel wrote, "If you can bind a hull with song, you can bind a will to a blade." The workshop read the message and felt cold. The Sparrow faced small fights first. A private flotilla tried to take a toll on a trade route. The Sparrow and two patched ships moved in a loose line. They sang names and made shields. The private ships fired and their targeting went wrong. The shields bent shots and the private fleet pulled away confused. The Sparrow's crew cheered. They felt brave. But victory brought eyes. A rival sent men who recorded a chorus and played it back near a weak plate. The recording tricked the plate. It opened a small hatch and a thief took a jar. The workshop learned a hard lesson: recorded songs are dangerous. Machines like living warmth. A recording had no breath. It could fool some plates but not the strong ones bound by living anchors. The watchers answered. Lights moved at the edge of the map. They did not speak like humans. Their rings showed on the screens like a code. One night a small light traced a slow line on the sea and the monitors showed a message in the same ring pattern as the fallen plate: teacher, student, mirror. The phrase felt like a test. The fleet grew. More patched hulls rose. Women and men rode them and sang. They opened more blocked ports. Food moved where hunger had lived. Children learned songs like prayers. The spare parts trade made new jobs. The city that once feared the scrap now built with it. Then the fleet tried something bold. The captains decided on the long song. They would sing from ship to ship for days so the watchers could not learn a single tune. If the watchers tried to copy them, the long line of voices would change faster than a recorder could follow. It was brave. It was dangerous. For 3 nights and 2 full days the fleet sang. Voices rose like wind over water. Names ran from mouth to mouth. Anchors were passed, jars checked, lists read twice. The sailors prayed and sang and kept time with old drums. The sea shivered with song. At first it worked. The watchers moved lights and then held back. The fleet cut through a fog bank and opened a route. Towns that had not seen bread for months rang bells. People danced and the Sparrow's crew drank and laughed. But the long song took a tax. Men who sang the longest woke with blanks. A young deckhand reached for a list and found a space where a name had been. He frowned and tried another anchor. The name would not come. He felt a small panic. A captain lost a teacher's first name and memoried it later only when a child called the teacher's story. The workshop's healers worked late. They taught double anchors, 2 jars, 2 wood beams, and a song in both hands. They taught families to tell names at sleep and morning. They taught children to carry a carved stick. These things helped. They did not stop the echo. Then a new shape rose from the deep. One night, as the fleet passed a line of fog, a shadow moved under the water. It was not shaped like any hull the sailors knew. It had no seams. A ring of light spread along its flank and then words formed on the Sparrow's console in the laughing pattern. The message was simple. It asked what the fleet had learned to do. The console showed a single question in the ring language, and then the lights along the dark hull blinked like a slow pulse. Who keeps the song now? The ring seemed to ask. The deck went quiet. Men at the rail felt their mouths go dry. The sea pressed near. The Sparrow's engine held steady, but the crew's hands trembled. A jar slipped from a sailor's belt and broke on the wet boards. The shards showed burned paper and half a name. Adil walked the deck and touched the broken jar. He felt the orb in his box warm like a warning. He looked up at the dark shape on the water and then at the faces around him. The names they had sung were theirs. The watchers had learned their music. Now the question came back not as a lesson but as a mirror. Cliffhanger, the Sparrow's youngest sailor, who had kept his list under his shirt, reached to read it and found the top line empty. The paper was blank where the captain's name had been. He looked up with fear and called out, "Who was our teacher?" Around him, voices stopped mid-song. The sea answered only with a slow, soft light. Fog sat on the water like a sheet. The lights of the scrap fleet were small, loose candles in a long dark room. Ships crept forward with slow engines. Voices rose again in the long song. The chorus ran like a thread from deck to deck. Names passed from mouth to mouth. The sea held the sound and moved with it. At first, the watchers only watched. Their lights blinked in calm patterns. The fleet kept time and kept faith. Towns saw the convoy come and cheered. Food went to streets that had been empty. Mothers put hot bread on tables. The Sparrow's crew drank and laughed under lanterns. They felt the world tilt back toward them. Then the watchers changed their light. A line of slow, soft pulses crawled along the horizon. The pulses did not look like storm lights. They looked like writing. On the workshop screens the same ring pattern appeared. The feed spelled a sentence in the old laughing code, "We listen. We learn your law." The chorus pushed on anyway. They must not stop, the captain said. The long song had to outpace copying. If they broke the line, the watchers could map their rhythm and copy it. Better to sing and lose names than to stop and let strangers learn the pattern whole. Songs rose and fell. The sea kept the beat. But something else began. Men found small blanks in lists. A sailor reached to read and a name had slipped into white. He frowned and read another name. That name was there. The first one would not come. He blamed sleep or cold. Others blamed hunger. Then the blank came to more piles of paper. The healers on the ships worked night and day. They taut anchors. They carved names into beams and buried jars of ash under bunks. A song would bring a name back sometimes. A neighbor's voice could wake a forgotten word. But sometimes the blank stayed. A whole morning would pass and a man would not remember the face of his wife. He could tell her stories. He could not say her name. Captains argued. "Stop the long song," one said. "We cannot keep losing our names." Another answered, "If we stop, they learn the whole pattern and take our way. We lose more than names." The Sparrow's captain stood in the stern and held his list like a small shield. He watched faces and thought of children who waited on shore. On the third night a shadow rose out of the fog. It was not a ship with a hull. It was a smooth shape that slid on the surface like a slow animal. Its flank showed the ring pattern, but the rings were bigger and deeper. The watchers had sensed something closer now. The thing made no sound that the sailors could hear. On the Sparrow's console a new line of green letters filled the screen. The message was not a test this time. It read in simple rings, "Teacher or mirror. Choose one." The words hit the decks like wind. People froze. Men who had sung since dawn felt the cord in their bones. The captain's fingers tightened on the list. Who did the watchers want? A teacher? A keeper? Someone to learn from? Or a mirror that would show them what humans were? The thing in the water turned and sent a soft wave of light. The sparrow's plates hummed. The jars on the deck shivered like old bones. The ring pattern message repeated, but this time it added a new promise. Give us the teacher. Let us learn with a living voice. Or watch your names fall like leaves. Panic moved like a cold animal. Mothers pulled children close. A sailor wept and would not say why. The captains met in a small cabin. They argued and shoved papers across a table. We will not hand over one of our people, one said. No. We will not trade a life for a root. Another said, but if we do not, they will take more. They already take names. On the sparrow, someone whispered the captain's old name and then a hand reached in a pocket and the paper was white. The top line of the list was nothing. The captain read the rest and his voice was small and cracked. He looked up at the ring-shaped light on the horizon and at crewmen who could not remember who had taught them to sing. Adil felt something cold in his chest. He had kept the original orb in his box. He took it out and pressed it. The orb hummed a reply that felt like a small throat clearing. It did not answer the watchers. It did not tell them to stop. It held a tiny map of the fleet and a point at the dark shape on the water. The captains wrote a plan in wet ink. They would not give one person. They would not choose a teacher. The fleet would answer in another way. They would bind the music to many new anchors and to new names. They would scatter names into towns and children and ovens. They would make the memory public and not keep it in one hand. They began to sing again, but slower now and with many new voices. Names moved off paper and into the mouths of women in market squares and cooks in back rooms. The fleet hoped that if the names lived in many mouths, the watchers could not steal them. The watchers answered with a pulse that touched the air like cold fingers. Lights spread among the ships and then reached into the decks. The Sparrow's youngest sailor reached for his list and found more blanks. He shouted a name he tried to remember. The voice came back from another ship far away, and for a moment the blank filled. The crew cheered and cried. Then the ring pattern on the horizon changed again. The words were not the same. They were smaller, like little teeth. The feed spelled a last line, you teach. We learn. We will mirror what you give. But some things we take to know. Watch your hands. A cold wind rose and the fog thinned to a thin paper. The dark shape on the water slid forward and a long white form broke the surface like a slow face. In the wash of its passage, a jar dropped from the Sparrow's rail and broke. The burnt paper inside flew into the wet planks and the ink ran like river. The captain stepped forward. He held the empty paper to the light and his mouth made a sound like the start of a name. He could not finish. Behind him, the crew fell quiet. The watcher's light did not move. They waited like a judge listening. Cliffhanger, the captain put his hand to his chest and felt the hollow where a name once sat. He looked at the dark shape in the sea and then at the list in his hand. Then the ring pattern on the horizon blinked slow and plain and one word formed in green letters across every screen, keepers. They called the last night the choice. The word keepers burned on every feed. The watchers had named them. The rings in the sky pulsed slow. The fleet felt the weight of that single word like a hand on the throat. Captains met by lamplight. They spoke in low voices. Some wanted to give one person a keeper to the watchers. They thought a single living key might stop the taking. Others said no. They remembered the blanks and the jars and the children who woke without a word. No one wanted one life to be the cost for many. Adil stood with Dr. Noor on the Sparrow's deck. The sea was flat and black. He kept the small orb safe in his pocket. He thought of the yard, of the workshop, of all the carved beams now hidden in houses and barns. He thought of the many voices that had learned to sing a name into wood. He thought of the jars of ash that moved from hand to hand like an old religion. We can't hand over a person, Noor said. Her voice did not shake. We will not make a living key. We will make a living net. A net of what? Adil asked. Of mouths, she said. Of memory. Of law. We tie names to people, and we make the city keep them. Not one keeper. Many keepers. The watchers can learn songs. They can watch lights. But they cannot take a name from every mouth at once. They chose a path that night. The fleet would not trade a life. The fleet would spread memory so wide that no outsider could take it. The plan had danger. It would ask more singing, more anchors, more work. It might cost memory in other ways. But the captains chose it. They called the plan the living archive. Towns carved names into beams and moved the beams into public houses. Mothers read names twice each night. Children learned long lists as games. Bakers tied strips of paper with names into loaves and sent them across bays. Sailors carried 2 jars for each name. Songs were taught in schools. The fleet posted its crews ashore for weeks so the towns could learn the lists and pass them until names lived in hundreds of voices. The long song returned, but it was different. It was not only at sea. It rose from markets, from laundries, from churches, and workshops. Many voices made the tide. The watchers saw the change. Their lights still came close. They still blinked with ring patterns. But the green lines on screens changed from commands into questions. In the fog one night, the distant dark shape moved again. It slid close enough for the sailors to see a seam of light like a bar across its flank. This time the console filled with not only the ring word but an image, rows of faces, every face listening. The watcher did not make a demand. It made an offer, or at least that is how the captured tones sounded. We learn from things that survive. Keep your songs. Teach them wide. It was not peace. It was a test. The watchers watched the many mouths. They could learn a song. They could not, the captains argued, take the song from every mouth at once. People wore memory in their hands and their throats now. Names lay in beams, in jar ash, in 100 voices. The watchers found less to steal. The fleet did not win without cost. The living archive asked people to sing more and hold memory harder. The echo, the small blanks grew in some places. Old men forgot a neighbor's face for a day. A child could not say a color until a grandmother hummed a chorus. The healers learned new cures, read names while baking bread, press a carved stick to a sleeping child's palm, sing a list twice at moonrise so memory could stitch again. The city learned to share the cost. Memory became a public thing. No single family held a private list. Towns kept 2 copies of every anchor. Children learned names as part of play. The many hands served as firewall. When one voice faltered, 10 others filled the gap. The watchers changed too. They did not attack the fleet after that. Their lights stayed at the edge of maps. Once, a single ring of light moved across feeds and a soft tone translated roughly as, "You teach well. We watch how you keep what you make." It felt like praise from a hard place. Years folded into years. The sparrow sank into stories. The yard became a museum. People came and touched a plate under glass and hummed the old tune. Adil grew old and his hands were stained with oil and song. The orb stayed in a simple box in the museum, not as a god, but as a relic. Children asked him for the story. He told it small and plain. "We learned to build from scraps," he would say. "We learned to sing and to bind names. We learned that anything you give a voice will learn from you. We learned to share the price." The law changed. The many bond became law in ports and towns. Machines must wait for many voices. Big acts needed public lists, carved beams, and jars kept in more than one hand. The fleet songs were turned into school lessons. Children played the old naming games. Memory work became part of growing up. There were always men and groups who tried to sell a recorded chorus, who tried to trap a plate, who wanted a single keeper. Law and song caught most. Sometimes a recorded chant fooled a weak plate and men stole a jar. The community came together then and sung the lost names until the memory woke again. The stolen names returned to speech if not to paper. On a clear evening, the museum bell rang. A child asked Adil, "Did they ever come back, the Watchers?" He looked toward the far line of sea and the small cold lights. He smiled a tired smile and shook his head a little. "We don't know," he said. "Maybe they still watch. Maybe they learn. But we learned something too. We learned to hold our names in our mouths and in our hands. That keeps them safer than any list on a screen." The sparrow's bell rang once more as dusk fell. People lifted lanterns and sang names aloud around the dock. The tune moved down alleys and into kitchens. It was not perfect, and it was not free. The cost lived on in small blanks and in careful rituals. But the city had turned scrap into ships, fear into song, and a fragile victory into a practice that could last. In the end, the legend was less about steel and more about sound. The fleet became a story told with names. Children learned the songs. Mothers burned a name into a jar. People passed lists by wood and by voice. The Watchers might still learn. But now the whole town learned too, and no single hand could ever hold the song alone.